Hello again, everyone. Happy holidays, and thanks for joining us as we tape another segment of Chicago Lawyer Magazine's Inside Out, a discussion of different aspects of the law with our unique husband and wife team of David Susler and Tina Martini. David has the inside perspective. He is Associate General Counsel at National Material LP. Tina, a partner at DLA Piper here in Chicago. She has the outside view. I'm Andy Shaw, President and CEO of the Better Government Association, and your host for these segments. This one, and I have to look down to make sure I get it right, this one titled Inflection Points, I guess that's turning points, and lessons learned. So let me ask the age-old question to each of you. What would you say were or are major turning points in your legal careers? And you want to take the first crack at it?
Sure. Well, as I think I've said before in the column, I grew up wanting to be a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer. I started out on the defense side, so certainly the first big turning point in my career was when I switched from plaintiffs to defense to plaintiff side.
Do you know who you represent?
I do.
Oh, okay.
Defense to plaintiff side, and then discovering not too long after that, now that I've reached my lifelong goal, I don't want to do this. Now what? It took a while to figure it out, but then I went inside on suggestions of friends, and this was not a turn on a dime inflection point. This was something that I realized over time once I went in-house and had re-engineered my career into being an in-house generalist, a general business lawyer, that, boy, I love this. So upon realizing that, that's a major inflection point in my career.
Tina?
So I've had a few. I would say that I come from a family of engineers and went to engineering school and started my master's with a specialty in safety engineering, fully expecting that I was going to have a career as an engineer. Worked at Motorola, got a job offer to go there after school was done. And on a dare, I took the LSAT and did well enough to get into Northwestern, and thought it was a sign from God, almost like the Blues Brothers or something, that I was supposed to go to law school. So, the rest is history. So that was a huge inflection point for me, and it was not something that was mapped out in my life at all. It was one of those, I was sort of living in the moment and just sort of went with my gut. I came to the firm as a real estate lawyer and graduated into the 1994 recession, and realized it was not a particularly great time to be a real estate lawyer, and transitioned as a second-year associate into intellectual property, which is what I've been practicing now for almost 20 years. So that was a major inflection point. And I'd say, a couple of other career inflection points include when I was on loan to a couple of clients for a total of about a year. That was just a hugely, monumentally important experience for me, just in terms of really getting inside the brains of a client. Also making partner and some of the leadership positions I've had, I would say, they really sort of, helped me transition into completely different types of activities on the leadership side and managing different groups outside of lawyers. And I would say that they've really been very important in making me who I am today as a lawyer.
Oh, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just kind of struck me listening to you, especially I think for the younger lawyers who may be listening to this, I hear people talk about things like inflection points, and I think that maybe that's a managed or a planned event, and it's really not. These are really looking back. It's a historical perspective that you realize that, and I think this discussion sort of proves what I often say. Lawyers generally fall into their specialties by serendipity, so we get lucky. But as you move through your career and you do reflect and recognize these inflection points, it does help you enhance your ability to manage going forward. But it takes a lot of history to look back on.
Yeah, and this is a segment that's less about the law than it is about personal things.
Right.
So as a point of personal privilege as the host for these segments, I'm going to offer what Shakespeare used to call an aside, which means the main characters are still on stage and someone is on the side of the stage and actually says something that is occasionally interesting, especially if it was Shakespeare. I can't promise it for me, but I'm going to just say, as someone who's had a long professional career too, much of it in television, recently as a watchdog head, I think the inflection points are most often not planned. I think they're accidental. They may be a decision you make, but with no knowledge that they will be pivotal or actually dispositive in how your life comes out. And to that end, I'll end quickly by saying that I think my major inflection point was 1983, when I was summarily fired by one television station. Broke my heart. I had 2 kids, a third on the way, and was rehired by another television station right at the start of the Harold Washington administration, the council wars in Chicago, and that gave me a chance to actually have a tremendous amount of time on television telling political stories that everyone in the Chicago area wanted to hear, and that basically allowed me to have a pretty good career in broadcasting. I didn't ask to be fired, nor did I want to be, but I still regard it as my major inflection point and the luckiest thing that ever happened to me, however painful it was at the time.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me.
No,
So let me ask you each, so the other question, which is maybe harder to answer, is if you have to look back, what's the one regret about the path? And I think we may have talked about this in a previous segment, but you're both satisfied with where you are, and I am too. But, you know, if I were asking me that, I'd probably have an answer. Is there one thing looking back that you regret that might have, as Frost said, made all the difference, the path not taken?
Well, I mean, I would say that I just, just personally, I don't like leaving things unfinished. And I started my master's in industrial engineering with a real focus on safety engineering, so industrial accidents, looking at situations like Bhopal, Chernobyl, airplane crashes, that sort of thing, in a mathematical way to try to figure out from a systems standpoint what could have been done differently to avoid these sorts of situations in the future. And while some people may say that's really, you know, very narrow and what good does that do, it actually gives you a different sort of perspective on the world, and you look at whether it's a factory or whether it's the way you run a process in any type of a company or organization. You just look at it with a little bit more of a discerning eye. And so I would have loved to have finished that degree.
And actually perhaps save some lives along the way in the whole area of disasters and safety. Not to say that you don't do important work now, but that in some ways could have been where the rubber met the human road more.
Yeah, and you know, it may have actually, I don't know, it could have very well maybe had me look at different areas of law beyond, you know, real estate, environmental, and IP. But I think it also would have been a really good addition to my skill set in terms of getting a little bit deeper into operations, because I think that from an operations standpoint, that type of that educational experience could have been helpful.
And also probably very functional in legal practice.
Absolutely.
Given the number of legal lawsuits and cases that result from those sorts of problems. I mean, you'd have had an expertise and the legal background.
Right, and just even running the business of a law firm, you know, from an operations perspective, it's very, I think all that is very helpful.
I'm not going to trump you, but I know you've said in an earlier segment that there was a time in your young life when you thought about becoming a rabbi. Now, you could have given us Mideast peace, and now you're in-house counsel. So, I mean, I don't know, they're probably close to equal, but
not you know, it's true. There were many times throughout my life that I thought about becoming a rabbi, and I have no regrets about not following that up. You know, I'm kind of the king of the woulda, shoulda, coulda. Although I try not.
Most rabbis are probably similar to that.
Yeah, I try not to have regrets, and I'm thinking, you know, as I sit here, the one experience in life that I feel I truly missed out on and cannot recapture was I really wanted to go study in Israel my junior year of college, which I didn't do. My mother died at the beginning of my sophomore year, and I just wasn't ready to go that far away from my family for that long. And I would have loved to have had that experience.
By the way, they still have universities there, and you could still go to school there. You're not too late.
But I'm not going to do it now because I have so many things going on that I don't.
When you retire.
When I retire. So you know, I can think of a lot of things that maybe I wish I had done, but I don't. I really, honestly, don't have regrets about them because I am who I am. Because of the experiences I've had, I am who I am, and I am who I am. Yeah, I'm too lucky for where I am now, and I wouldn't be here if I had done anything differently.
At the risk of making this too long a segment, I'll ask you 2 questions in one and ask you to give short answers, because I think we run the risk of spoiling the holiday season of our viewers by exceeding the time limit and taking them away from their wassail punch, anyway, or whatever the libation of the day is. So this is best piece of advice you ever received, worst piece of advice you ever received. And it can be about life or the law or whatever, but it has to be short. Like I used to be told in the TV business, you've got 30 seconds. That's an arbitrary 30, but try to answer briefly.
Why don't you kick it off?
I can't think of a worse piece of advice.
And it's possible you didn't receive one.
I have received so many pieces of great advice from my dad. I guess, and I think I wrote about this in the printed column, but one of the best pieces of advice he gave me relating to the practice of law is just, you need to learn about as many different things in the world as you can possibly learn about, because everything is useful in being a lawyer. You never know what you'll encounter, and so you need to be constantly learning and absorbing the entire spectrum of the world. Don't have tunnel vision.
That you can't do much better for a piece of advice, probably, from a parent.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I would say the worst, let's start with the negative and move to the positive to finish things up. I would say the worst piece of advice I got was when I was asked to consider becoming the hiring partner for the Chicago office about 10 years ago. And there were several people who told me that they thought it was the worst use of my time, and they recommended that I not do it and that I focus on my billable hours. And looking back now, I'm glad I tossed the advice out the window.
Oh, you decided to do it?
I decided to do it, and I ended up being the hiring partner for 5 years, because it started a journey for me from a leadership perspective and acquiring skills that I just would have never gotten just by working on clients. It gave me an understanding of different HR type issues that clients go through, and it really helped me just round out my skill set. It took me from being very much of an introvert into having to be more of an extrovert, which is really something that everyone needs to be now, especially when you're trying to develop business.
So maybe the best piece of advice was whoever told you to ignore that advice.
Which was me, myself, and I. But I would say the best piece of advice I ever got was from my brother, who told me when I got into Northwestern Law School and was really struggling with finances and had gotten a full ride to another school. He said to me, do whatever you need to do to go to law school and to go to the best law school you can, notwithstanding finances, because the rest is history. And although it was very difficult for me financially, it all worked out.
Well, as the father of a graduate of Northwestern Law School, who was first in her class, editor-in-chief of Law Review, went on to clerk for a Supreme Court justice and work at the White House, she must have gotten a good piece of advice from someone in the family about where to apply and where to go. I don't know who that would have been. Probably her mother. Anyway, David, Tina, another segment of Chicago Lawyer Magazine's Inside Out. I'm your host, Andy Shaw. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in the new year. And one more time, happy holidays, and thanks for watching.